So some of you who might watch a bit of the news or know a little bit about politics might hear words like left and right being thrown about. So what exactly does that mean? Honest answer is it's complicated. We all vaguely know what left is, and we all vaguely know what right is. Yeah, but for instance, who's more right wing, Margaret Thatcher or Adolf Hitler? Now that might seem like a duh, obviously Hitler, but that's not. It depends really on what you're looking at, right? Because the spectrum is not even just left and right. Because first of all, we have to define what left means, and we have to define what right means. So broadly speaking, right means conservative. It means, like, to an extent, it means reactionary. It means slow and steady progress, right? It means you want to keep things as they are as much as possible, right? Left mainly means you want to change things, yeah. So basically, so a good way of like thinking of it in very broad terms is this, right? Looking about at the world, yeah. How much of it do you need? How much of it do you want to see change, right? If it's mainly good and it just needs a few little tweaks, then chances are you're going to be more on the right of the spectrum. If you need, if you think that the whole system is rotten and it needs a complete overhaul, chances are you will be left wing, right? So that's essentially what we mean by left and right. And then there's also all kinds of debates with regard to like what tax rates and what immigration policy, etc., etc. It's a thing of, the reason why I say it's complicated is because you can find someone who has quote unquote left wing views on something, and and that same person can also have right wing views on something. So when you say this person's left wing or right wing, etc., etc., it's a thing of it's quite reductionist, and it's a thing of there's very few people who have views that are completely left wing, and people who have completely right wing views. Okay, most people are somewhere on a spectrum, and they're they're on a spectrum for very different things on different. They'll be here for one thing, they'll be there for another thing, they'll be there for some, etc., etc. Right. So probably the best way of thinking about it is not even necessarily just as a spectrum like that. There's many different political compasses thing. They've got there's you have authoritarian and libertarian. So if you want the government to be like strong and like not really give people rights, then you'll be authoritarian. If you believe in people having like the freedom to choose and to not be bossed about by the government, then you'll be more libertarian. So it's really complicated, right? So it's not so just hearing people go left and right, you have to look into that a lot more. And someone calling someone, oh, that person's a left winger or that person's a right winger, you really need to do research into them and see how accurate that is. Because oftentimes people will label people things that is really far off from what they actually are. People be like, oh, that person's a communist, and oh, that person's a fascist. It's like, no, not exactly. No. So really do look into what people are saying, and yeah, don't listen to what other people are saying about them. Do your own research. Right. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is looking at influences. Yeah, we're going to look at where we actually get our political values from. Okay, and political values are far more, they're far deeper than just thinking I have left wing values, I have right wing. That's kind of that. Really and truly, a lot more. It's a lot more subtle than that, and it requires a lot deeper analysis. So, for instance, the classic thing of what do you value more? Do you value freedom or do you value stability? Right. So people who don't really like much change will value things being kept the same, yeah, because the better the devil you know, as the saying goes, right? So whereas people who want freedom, people who want people who are risk takers essentially, yeah, they don't really mind that. They're not really looking for stability. Yeah? They're happy to change things up. So where do those values come from? Do we have you know, when you were raised, do you have a parent who was more risk taking and another one who was more looking for stability, etc.? I mean, it's really complicated. Like, kind of, it's not easy at all to think where we actually get these core values from. But these core values, that is actually what really shapes us. The mindset that we have and stuff, actually quite accurately predicts which way we're going to vote politically, right? So and this is why typically, so when people are younger, people tend to go with the crowd. Yeah, people tend to be like, oh, this is like, you know, young people vote this way, so that's the cool thing. But as people get older, they tend to diverge from that. Their opinions tend to change. But if you look at their core values haven't really changed. Just the people who they vote for has changed, right? So when people kind of say, oh, this person's flip-flop, this person's like switch party, etc., it's a thing of actually it's a lot more complicated than that, and it's a thing of actually when you drill down to it, that person has maintained the same values over time. It's as the saying goes, like, kind of, my party didn't leave me. I didn't leave my party. The party left me, right? So it's that kind of phenomenon, right? So people do change their minds all the time when it comes to political parties, and actually it's a good thing that people change their mind because it shows that people are open to challenge themselves, right? To be perfectly honest, I don't really care. Whenever I speak to someone, I don't really care what they think. I care why they think it. So if you've arrived at a position, even if it's a position that I agree with, if you've just arrived there because mummy and daddy told you to, and like you've not ever questioned that, etc., etc., I have far less respect for that than for someone who was raised in a completely different setting and yet has these values, yeah, because they came to it by questioning their beliefs and by questioning the beliefs of the people around them and stuff. And so that to me is much more interesting. I'm much more interested in being like, okay, why do you think X, Y, Z? And this is, you know, tied up with the Socratic method. We'll talk about that at another point when we go through philosophy. But essentially, it's this thing of keep asking people, why do you believe that? Why do you think that? And 9 times out of 10, you'll find that most people, their why is really, really flimsy, right? They've not really actually stopped and thought why they think X, Y, or Z. So that's really why when you're discussing politics with someone, especially whether they agree with you or disagree with you, it's always interesting to just ask, why do you think that? And you'd be surprised at just how deep those actual beliefs are in reality. And finally, we're going to be looking at what are your general views about the world in which we inhabit, right? So, are you an idealist, right? Or are you a realist? Do you look at the world as it could be, or do you look at the world as it currently is, right? And this also is tied up with your view of human nature. So if you feel that humans are naturally flawed, right, you're going to tend to go towards systems that keep people somewhat in check, right? And that's, you know, tied up with the human nature. If you think that human nature is more fluid and actually like all that we have to do is tweak the systems and stuff, yeah, and then we'll have utopia, then that also really shapes like your views and stuff. Yeah, so how idealistic are you versus how realistic you are? And this will tie into what we're going to talk about another video with regards to philosophy, where we're talking about the difference between the Hobbesian worldview and the Rousseau's point of view, right? So Hobbes, you know, the world is like the state of nature is basically horrible, like kind of every person for themselves. Or Rousseau basically saying that it's human nature is flexible and it's really up to us to tweak it however way we want. And finally, I'm just gonna finish off with a little quote from me myself, which is this: "We are nothing more than the amalgamation of everything that we think has happened, and everything that we think will happen. Politics is really, really important. This is why it's really important for you to educate yourself and to really think critically about what it is you think, how you came to that conclusion, what you think will come in the future, and how you can work with other people in order to, create a better world than the world that we were all born into.